Imagine a young American woman, bound and helpless, thrown from a roaring helicopter by a gang of merciless bullies, only to discover she's a lethal armed officer with a secret that will turn their world upside down. Buckle up for a heart-pounding tale of revenge, courage, and jaw-dropping twists that will leave you speechless. Subscribe now to dive into this electrifying 5,000-word story and join thousands of thrill seekers across the USA and UK who can't get enough of epic narratives like this. Don't miss out on the action! Bullies threw a tight American girl from the helicopter, then learned she was an armed officer. The helicopter tore through the sky, its blades slicing the air with a relentless thump that reverberated like a war drum. Thick clouds, streaked with gold and crimson from the setting sun, churned outside the open side door, casting fleeting shadows across the cargo hold. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with the stench of sweat, beer, and unchecked arrogance. 4 young men in blue and yellow varsity jackets lounged across the metal benches, their laughter sharp and cruel, cutting through the roar of the engines. They were in their early 20s, their faces flushed with alcohol and the thrill of dominance. Derek, the ringleader, was a hulking figure with a buzz cut and a smirk that seemed permanently etched into his square jaw. His broad shoulders strained against his jacket as he leaned forward, cracking his knuckles with deliberate menace. "Look at her, boys," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he gestured to the young woman kneeling on the cold, revetted floor. "Thought she was tough, didn't she? Not so tough now." Ellie Harper, 22, knelt with her hands bound tightly behind her back, the coarse rope biting into her wrists. Her chestnut hair whipped wildly in the wind blasting through the open door, strands sticking to her sweat, dampened face. Her green eyes, wide with what the bullies mistook for fear, darted between them, taking in every detail: Derek's smug grin, the way Jake's lanky frame slouched against the wall, the nervous twitch in Kyle's fingers, and Matt's forced bravado as he tossed back another swig of beer. To them, she was just a random girl they'd found at the remote airfield, a perfect target for their drunken game of power. They didn't know her name, her story, or the fire burning beneath her trembling exterior. They didn't know she was an undercover ATF officer, trained to face far worse than their juvenile cruelty. The helicopter tilted, the wind howling louder, and Ellie swayed, her bound hands useless against the motion. Jake, his crook grin widening, tossed an empty beer can at her. It bounced off her shoulder, clattering to the floor, and she flinched but didn't cry out. The others roared with laughter, their voices echoing off the steel walls, a cacophony of mockery that made Ellie's stomach churn, not with fear, but with a growing resolve. She'd been at the airfield for weeks, posing as a civilian to infiltrate a smuggling ring. Tonight, she'd been gathering intel when these idiots stumbled into her path, their egos inflated by liquor and the thrill of stealing a helicopter for a joyride. They'd spotted her near the hangar, alone and seemingly vulnerable, and decided to make her their entertainment. Derek stood, his heavy boots clanging against the floor, and grabbed Ellie's arm, yanking her to her feet. The wind screamed through the open door, tugging at her clothes, her hair a chaotic halo in the fading light. "Time to have some real fun," he growled, dragging her toward the edge. The ground below was a dizzying blur of forest and shadow, the Appalachian foothills stretching out like a dark, endless sea. Ellie's heart pounded, her breath shallow, but her mind was razor sharp. She'd trained for moments like this, high stakes, high adrenaline scenarios where one wrong move meant death. Her fear was real, but it was a tool, not a master. She cataloged every detail: the weight of Derek's grip, the positions of his friends, the pilot's tense posture at the controls. The pilot, a grizzled man named Hank with weathered skin and a graying beard, glanced back, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't part of their crew, just a hired hand they'd coerced with cash and threats. "You kids are out of your damn minds," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the blades. Derek ignored him, his focus on Ellie. "What's wrong, princess?" he taunted, his face inches from hers, scared. Ellie's lips parted, her voice low but steady. "You're going to regret this," she whispered, the words swallowed by the wind. Derek laughed, mistaking her defiance for desperation, and with a final shove, he let her go. Her body tumbled into the void, the bullies' laughter chasing her as she plummeted through the clouds. Ellie's mind didn't freeze. As she spun through the air, her training took over. She twisted her body, angling toward a dense forest canopy she'd glimpsed from the helicopter. The wind tore at her, the rope around her wrists chafing her skin, but she focused on survival. Tucking her legs, she braced for impact, crashing through branches that snapped and splintered against her body. Pain exploded in her ribs, her arms, her legs, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay conscious. She hit the ground hard, rolling down a steep slope until she slammed into a tree trunk. For a moment, everything was black. Then, gasping, she forced her eyes open, her chest heaving as she lay in the damp underbrush. She was alive. And she was furious. Back in the helicopter, the bullies were still riding their high, oblivious to the storm they'd unleashed. Derek sprawled across a bench, cracking open another beer, his laughter booming. "That's how you do it," he roared, high-fiving Jake, who was practically doubled over with glee. Matt, the youngest, grinned nervously, while Kyle, the quiet one, stared out the open door, his face pale. "What if someone saw us?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. Derek waved him off, his smirk unwavering. "Relax, man. We're in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's gonna care about some random chick." Hank, the pilot, gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white. He'd seen plenty in his years flying choppers, smugglers, mercenaries, even the occasional Black Ops team. But something about this felt wrong. That girl's eyes hadn't been those of a victim. They'd held a glint of steel, a calculation that made his gut twist. He kept his mouth shut, though. These kids were reckless, but they'd paid him well, and he wasn't about to get involved. Still, as the helicopter banked toward the airfield, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Below, Ellie lay in the forest, her body aching but her mind clear. The fall had been a gamble, but she'd known the terrain from her mission briefings. The ATF had been tracking a smuggling ring, using this airfield for months, moving weapons and cash under the cover of night. Ellie had been embedded as a civilian, working odd jobs at the airfield, blending in, to gather intel. The bullies' stunt had blown her cover, but it had also given her an unexpected advantage. She worked at the ropes with a jagged rock, her fingers raw and bleeding, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The pain was a distraction, but she pushed through, her training keeping her focused. Finally, the ropes snapped free, and Ellie flexed her wrists, wincing at the red welts. She reached into her boot, pulling out a concealed tactical knife and a small, waterproof radio. "Alpha Team, this is Harper," she whispered, her voice steady despite the pain. "I've been compromised. Requesting immediate extraction and backup. Coordinates are..." She rattled off her location, her eyes scanning the darkening forest. The response crackled through, "Copy Harper." Team en route. "ETA 20 minutes. Stay sharp." Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line. 20 minutes was too long. The bullies were probably back at the airfield by now, thinking they'd gotten away with murder. Her cover was blown, but that didn't mean her mission was over. The smuggling ring was still active, and those idiots had just stumbled into the middle of it. She stood, ignoring the sharp pain in her side, and began moving through the forest, her knife in hand. The bullies thought they'd won. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Her mind flashed back to her training, grueling months at the ATF Academy, learning to shoot, fight, and survive in the worst conditions. She'd been top of her class, driven by a need to prove herself in a male-dominated field. Her father, a retired Marine, had taught her to never back down, and that lesson burned in her now. Those bullies weren't just a threat to her. They were a threat to everything she'd worked for. She'd make them pay. But first, she had to get to the airfield. As she navigated the dense woods, Ellie pieced together the events of the night. The bullies had been at the airfield when she'd been scoping out a suspicious crate in the hangar. She'd played the part of a scared civilian when they cornered her, hoping to avoid a confrontation. But their egos had taken over, and now here she was, battered but unbroken, ready to turn the tables. The radio crackled again. "Harper, be advised, we've got chatter about a second chopper. Possible hostiles. Proceed with caution." Ellie's jaw tightened. The smuggling ring. Of course. This night was about to get a lot messier. The helicopter touched down at the airfield, its blades slowing to a lazy whirl as the floodlights cast harsh shadows across the tarmac. The bullies stumbled out, their laughter more subdued now, the adrenaline fading. Derek led the way, his swagger intact, but Kyle lagged behind, his eyes darting to the dark edges of the airfield. "Something's off," he muttered, rubbing his hands together. Jake rolled his eyes. "You're such a buzzkill, man." "We're fine." Matt nodded, but his grin was forced, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. Hank stayed in the cockpit, pretending to check the gauges. In truth, he was listening, his ears straining for any sign of trouble. He'd flown for some shady characters before, but these kids were amateurs, and amateurs were dangerous. He'd seen the girls fall, and something told him she wasn't gone for good. He glanced at the radio, tempted to call for help, but thought better of it. Whatever was coming, he wanted no part of it. Half a mile away, Ellie moved through the forest like a ghost, her footsteps silent despite the pain radiating through her body. She'd patched up a gash on her arm with a strip of her shirt, but her ribs ached with every breath. The radio crackled with updates. Her team was 10 minutes out, but the second chopper was closer. She crouched behind a tree, her eyes locked on the airfield's lights. The bullies were still there, oblivious, their truck parked near the hangar. She could see their silhouettes, laughing and shoving each other, completely unaware of the danger closing in. Ellie's mind raced. Her original plan had been to gather evidence and call in the cavalry, but the bullies had forced her hand. Now, she had to neutralize them before the smugglers arrived. She checked her knife, wishing she had her service weapon, but it was hidden in a lockbox back at the hangar. She'd have to improvise. Moving low, she skirted the edge of the airfield, staying in the shadows. The bullies were her first target, but the real threat was the smuggling ring. If that second chopper was armed, things could go south fast. At the airfield, the first sign of trouble was a low hum, a drone circling high above, its red light blinking in the night sky. Jake spotted it, squinting. "What the hell is that?" he said, his voice sharp. Before anyone could answer, a spotlight snapped on, pinning them in its glare. "This is the ATF!" A voice boomed from the darkness. "Drop to the ground now." The bullies froze, their bravado crumbling. Derek's hand went to his pocket, where he kept a switchblade, but a warning shot cracked through the air, kicking up dirt at his feet. Ellie stepped from the shadows, her ATF badge glinting in the light. Her hair was matted with blood, her clothes torn, but her stance was unyielding. "You picked the wrong girl," she said, her voice cold as steel. The bullies' faces paled, their mouths agape. Derek stammered, You're supposed to be dead." Ellie's lips curved into a grim smile. "Takes more than a fall to kill me." The ATF team swarmed in, their rifles trained on the bullies, who dropped to their knees, hands raised. But Ellie's focus shifted. The radio crackled. "Harper, second chopper inbound, armed and hostile. ETA 2 minutes." Her eyes narrowed. The bullies were a sideshow. The real fight was coming. The bullies, now cuffed and shoved into the back of an ATF van, were silent, their earlier bravado replaced by raw fear. Derek's jaw clenched, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his hands. Kyle was shaking, muttering apologies under his breath, while Jake and Matt stared blankly, their minds grappling with the reality of their situation. They'd thought they were untouchable, kings of their small world. Now they were nothing. Ellie, meanwhile, was already moving. The ATF team had secured the airfield, but the incoming chopper changed everything. Her radio buzzed with updates. The smuggler's helicopter was a military-grade transport, likely carrying automatic weapons and a crew of hardened criminals. Her original mission had been to gather intel, but the bullies' stunt had escalated things into a full-blown confrontation. She grabbed a rifle from an agent and took cover behind a stack of crates, her eyes scanning the sky. "Stay sharp," she told her team. "These guys won't go down easy." The smuggler's chopper roared into view, its searchlight sweeping the airfield. Gunfire erupted as armed men rappelled down, their weapons blazing. Ellie moved like a predator, her training overriding the pain in her body. She took out 2 smugglers with precise shots, their bodies crumpling to the tarmac. Bullets tore through the air, and she dove behind a fuel drum, her heart pounding. The ATF team returned fire, but they were outnumbered. Ellie's mind raced. She needed to end this fast. Spotting a crate marked explosives, she formed a desperate plan. She sprinted through the chaos, dodging bullets, and pried open the crate, revealing a stash of grenades. Her hand steady, she lobbed one toward the smuggler's chopper, still hovering low. The explosion rocked the airfield, sending the helicopter spiraling into a nearby field, where it crashed in a fireball. The remaining smugglers, stunned, began to surrender, their hands raised as the ATF team closed in. As the dust settled, Ellie stood, her chest heaving, her badge still glinting. The bullies watched from the van, their faces a mix of awe and dread. They'd thought they were invincible. But they'd crossed a woman who was tougher, smarter, and deadlier than they could have imagined. Ellie turned to them, her eyes burning. "You're lucky I'm the one who found you," she said. "Next time you won't be." The airfield fell silent, save for the crackle of flames and the distant wail of sirens. Ellie's mission was complete, but the scars of that night, both physical and mental, would linger. For the bullies, it was a lesson in humility they'd carry forever. For Ellie, it was just another day on the job, a reminder that she was built for this, and no one, not even a helicopter full of fools, could break her.